So you're going to get 2 episodes this week. Saturday, I'll be back as usual with another podcast. But today we're going to continue the series of exploring the branches of Mormon fundamentalism as we take a look at the true and living Church of Jesus Christ of the last days, also called the TLC or Harmston Group. Christopher Layton, who's an apostle of the TLC, and I have a conversation about the group's founder, Jim Harmston. Then we move on to the history of the TLC as we look at the group from its inception to the present time. We go over some of the challenges that they have faced and finish up by talking about some of the unique doctrines that are held by the TLC. Now, we may not always agree on the doctrines, but if we truly desire understanding, we need to be able to explore these beliefs and understand what it is our Mormon fundamentalist brothers and sisters believe. That's next on this episode of the Mormon Renegade Podcast. Look, it's no secret that our society has become much more crude and coarse. To become and raise men and women of virtue and character is a Herculean task. To help with this, I have recently wrote and published a book. Now, back in the 1700s, Washington had a book called Rules of Civility and Decent Behavior in Company and Conversation. It was a book with 110 rules that talked about how to conduct yourself like a civilized person in society, something that today's society is sorely lacking. What I did is I went back through the book and I reinterpreted his original sayings for the 21st century. So the book is laid out in a way in which you see Washington's original rule. Right below that is my explanation for the 21st century, and below that you'll find 2 or 3 examples of where to use this in the real world. Now, to go along with this, there's a workbook that helps parents teach these principles and practices to their kids. To find the book, go to MormonRenegade.com, go to the bottom of the page, search out the blog post, and order your copy today. I can bear personal testimony from personal experience that this is an invaluable tool to help you raise men and women of virtue and character. So as I alluded to in the show open here, I have a few announcements to make. But first, I've been really prompted all week to address some folks out there in the audience. I don't know who you are. It's just a feeling I've got from the Spirit this whole week. First, I felt prompted to address you, the listener. If you're here on this podcast listening, it's not an accident. There's a reason for that. Most likely, you're either being prepared or called to something. Now, what that is, I don't know. I'm not your spiritual leader. But I can point you in the direction of someone who can tell you, and that's our Father and our God. He stands ready to hear those prayers and to reveal to you what you need in these last days. Now, I want to speak just for a second to folks who are feeling a little confused about where to go and what to do. I've had an increasing number of emails over the last few weeks from folks asking where they can go to attend church. Look, myself and others are here to help. No matter who you are, if you're a traditional believing Mormon, there's a place for you in the fullness of the gospel, both for you and your family. Heck, if we can't find a place, you can come worship with me and my family. That door is always open. Now, I know things in Mormonism feel a little confusing right now. I get it. I've been there. If you're feeling this way, please, 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 I'm begging you not to throw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to your testimony of the restored gospel. If you are leaving the LDS church but still have a testimony, or if you feel like your testimony is hanging by a thread, reach out. You can always reach out to me. I will always answer your emails. And if it's an emergency, put 911 in the description. I will reach out to you quick. I and others stand ready and willing to help you any way possible. Maybe you just need to talk through some questions. We can do that here. Myself and others in the Mormon fundamentalist community stand ready to help you no matter where you end up or no matter where you feel called. But please don't throw your testimony of the restored gospel away. Okay, announcement number 1. One place I feel like we can do better in fundamentalism is helping the sisters, both in fundamentalism as well as sisters investigating Mormon fundamentalism. To help those sisters specifically, my wife Tanya and my wife Amber and women from a few different faith traditions within Mormon fundamentalism have set up a new Facebook group just for these sisters. Its name is Mormon Fundamentalism for Women. I know it's not real catchy and it's a simple name, but hey, we aren't exactly marketing experts, you know what I mean? Now, this is just for the sisters. Let me stress again, this is just for the sisters. That means no dudes. If any of the admins catch a dude trying to infiltrate this group, they will be mocked mercilessly on this podcast for quite a few weeks. So don't go there, fellas. It's not going to work out in your favor. This is a private group where if a woman with questions about fundamentalism can go and ask questions without having to worry about being exposed, they can have their privacy protected. The link to that Facebook group can be found in the episode's show notes or at mormonrenegade.com in the blog menu of the website. Finally, I want to tell you about some changes that I've made to the news program I do when you subscribe to the $12 package on Patreon. I've retooled that show so that you're going to get more analysis and less comedy. My hopes is that as we begin to enter more and more troubled times, you'll be able to digest the news in a way that is really from the point of view of someone who believes in the fullness of the restored gospel. So if you feel like subscribing to that news program, you can do that at Patreon under the Mormon Renegade page, and that's $12 a month. Now, for the next 4 weeks, I'm going to be putting up the news program for free on Rumble so that you can get a taste, because I don't want you just to buy something you don't feel like you're going to get your money's worth. So go to the Mormon Renegade Rumble page, look it up, and for the next 4 weeks, that news program will be free so you can try it out and know if it's for you or not. In conclusion, I just want to say how thankful I am to you, the listener, for coming here every week. And I hope that your time here is well spent, that you feel like you're getting something out of this. That is so important to me. If there's anything you ever want discussed on the podcast, feel free to drop me a line. We'll definitely take that under consideration. But know that I'm so thankful to you, the listener, that's been here with me on this journey as we've explored Mormon fundamentalism, and we look forward to just keeping this going. So again, thank you for listening. Chris, how you doing?
Doing great.
Dude, I'm excited you agreed to come on. I know it can always be a little bit disconcerting to come on and talk about what you believe, so thanks for being here.
Yeah.
Now, Chris, you're an apostle in the True and Living Church, right? The TLC. Right. What's the full name of that of the church again?
The True and Living Church of Jesus Christ of Saints of the Last Days.
Nice. So, real quick, who was the founder there? How did you guys come into being, that sort of thing?
Well, James Harmston is the founder of the church, and it came into being from, originally it was established in 1990, and, it was how do I explain? When he began to investigate, let me back up a little bit. When he began to investigate what was going on in the LDS church, he could see things were starting to go south. And he started asking questions in his quorum meetings, particularly about, how come, we're taught the true order of prayer and we're told not to pray in the true order of prayer. Or another one, he said that he met with a shirt-tail relative, I think he's called him, who was a temple president in Ogden. And he asked him, hey, do women have the priesthood? And he said, well, no, only their husbands have the priesthood. And he says, well, what about those women that are getting the ordinances in there? Then I suppose that men are doing the ordinances for them for the women, right? In their temple ordinances? No, of course not. Now he says, well, then are women doing these ordinances? And he says, yes. Well, then do they have priesthood to do those ordinances? Well, no. Well, what kind of ordinances are they doing? Well, the same ones they do in the men's. And what kind of those? Well, those are priesthood ordinances. So you're saying that the priesthood ordinances that the men are doing on the men's side of the temple are also being done on the women's side. So wouldn't that mean that maybe the women also hold the priesthood? Yeah. So anyways, there were times like that eventually would get him in trouble with the stake president and things. And
real quick, can I ask a question real quick?
Sure.
You said some of the changes. What kind of changes was he seeing in 1990 that would have been concerning to him?
Well, there was the big one when they changed the temple ordinances at the beginning of 1990. It was April, I think it was, in 1990, when they had taken out the penalties. They took out the 5 points of fellowship. They took out the Adamic language, the lecture at the veil, those sorts of things. I mean, when you take out the penalties, we're told, because I was endowed before I went on my mission in 1988. And we're told, these things you must never divulge nor forget. And those penalties were part of it. I'm not revealing those penalties to you in this setting, but I'm telling you that these things we were told never to forget, now we're supposed to forget about them because somehow they're not important anymore.
Right.
And those were the changes that were done in 1990 that sealed the deal for the LDS Church, and Ezra Benson was all the brethren were basically saying, hey, we're cool with it, we're fine with it, and as much as he was loved, there were things that were done that were wrong. So anyways, those were the big changes that were done.
So real quick, in the TLC, is it kind of a tenet that that's when the church went into apostasy, was when the ordinances were changed in 1990? Because in a lot of fundamentalism, there's a narrative, and that by the time Heber J. Grant is president of the church, that's when the apostasy really begins to happen.
Well, in 1832, we have Joseph receiving the revelation that the church in D&C 84 is under condemnation for vanity and unbelief. Well, that basically started the clock for the church. Now, Brigham Young took everybody out west, and he tried to take another run at it. And he had a lot of people that were more interested in the things of this world, the customs and fashions of the world, than they were really in being saints. And so, the issue is that the temple endowment that Joseph was trying to establish for the saints, those were what we call first anointings. Now, those things, if you are true and faithful in keeping your covenants and your first anointings, then you will be eligible to receive your second anointings, which is your calling and election. Now, Heber J. Grant, he basically killed it. By the time he came along, there were practically none that were being done of the second anointings. And so those people had no way of receiving that ordinance by that time. And so that heads you up to the big question that I asked when I was in the LDS Church. Well, when I got my endowment, I asked, how is it that I become a king and a priest? Because I'm told that in the endowment that I'm only anointed to become such. So apparently there's something better that has to happen. I didn't know what that was. I had no idea that it was the second anointing or the calling and election ordinance. And I had asked it several times. I just figured, well, it must be my celestial marriage to my wife that, someday God will just round me up and give me those things when I need them. So, basically the answer to your question is when do they go south? It was in pretty rough shape by the time they even got to Heber Grant, but they were wanting to change the temple garments, and things were going south even before that. I mean, Joseph, when he went, it was going bad even when Joseph was there. When they sent a letter to him, Emma sent a letter to him saying, "Hey, you better come back," because that, they told him that he's like leaving the flock to the wolves. And that's when he said, "Well, if my life is of no value to my friends, then it is of none to me." And so where did it go bad? Pretty much almost right at the beginning. I mean, when you're talking, the Lord has condemned the church in 1832. The church had just barely been established.
Right. So in your view, it's kind of a gradual worsening.
Right. Because you see, they had kings and priests. They had members of what we would call the Church of the Firstborn, those who are anointed, of the quorum of the anointed. Brigham was one. Heber Kimball was one. There was a good number of them. I can't recall how many there were. I would assume at least hundreds, but I can't remember. But but these people, men and women, who received these ordinances, kings and queens, priests and priestesses, eventually they would just simply live out their lives, but they could not pass on those blessings to their posterity. So you're talking basically it's kind of like a war of attrition. Eventually they just died out.
Right. So real quick, before we jump back onto Jim Harmston and the church, I want to talk about you for just a second. When did you first realize, hey, something's off here, something's not right? What was your first inclination? Because look, nobody, I was LDS long enough to know nobody really accidentally falls into this, right?
Yeah.
Normally there's something that tips the hand and you're kind of like, well, I guess I better read up on this. And then next thing you know, you're down the Adam God rabbit hole and you have the old crap moment. What happened with you there?
Well, it was the Adam God thing. I mean, because if there's anything that a prophet should know who God is.
Right.
And, when Brigham Young said, Adam is our father and God, the only God with whom we have to do, then that should be pretty clear. And, I went to my bishop and asked him, I says, well, aren't we supposed to believe that Adam is God? And he pulled out Mormon Doctrine by Bruce R. McConkie. And he began to read out of that, and Bruce R. McConkie, he just, I can't remember exactly what he said. He says it's only apostates believe in that.
Yep.
And then I'm trying to think who else there was, but he was kind of the main one that he pulled out. And he says, well, does that answer your questions? Well, at the time, I was still a submissive servant to the state. So what am I going to do? And so I kept it quiet for a while, but then I started to see some other things. When I did realize that there was that this temple ordinance change was not the right thing that should have happened, because most of everybody, including my own parents, they thought, oh, this is a wonderful, glorious change, and God has revealed his will from heaven type of thing. And by the time I went to my last session in the Jordan River Temple, that was my last one, I could feel God's anger in that building to where it felt like it was going to explode. I told my wife, I says, I will not go back into that building again or any other of the LDS temples.
Ooh, that's a pretty dynamic turn on just one session. But so what was your wife's response?
she was quiet. She kept quiet. You know, it took her quite a while. I had to do a lot of investigating, before I really made the decision that, you know, it was time for this change. It was probably a year of investigating some of this stuff. And I had a friend who was in this church. And so he was giving me some of the pamphlets of the church, and I was reading it. I hid it in my Book of Mormon while I was listening in sacrament meeting. And, my wife knew. She'd thump me once in a while. But, I wasn't going to be stopped. Once all of a sudden you wake up, you can't stop from that insatiable urge to find out. You can't help it. It's like as if there is a magnet inside of you that's just drawing you, and so.
Yeah. No, and the funny thing is that, like, I enjoyed going to the LDS temple. I was a weekly temple attending kind of guy, right? Because I just dug it.
Mhm.
But there was at about year 5, I can remember thinking something doesn't flow quite right in this, and I couldn't figure it out.
Mhm.
And it wasn't until years later I started reading about Adam God. I started reading about the temple changes, where I'm like, oh, that's what it is. Because here's the thing. I think no matter how hard the LDS Church tries, it'll never be able to get rid of those vestiges of Adam God that are there in that temple ceremony.
Mhm.
And the more they try, I think the more disjointed or discombobulated the endowment will continue to feel, because you're not getting the whole story. I mean, it's when you break down the temple ceremony, it's ultimately a very effective teaching mechanism for Adam God, the temple drum, so to speak, right? In addition to the
Right. Well, not only that, but it is a parallel image of the first vision.
right. Yep. 100%. And so, yeah, it's absolutely. So how did you discover Jim Harmston in the TLC? Was that church already set up when you came out?
Yep.
Okay.
Oh yeah. By the time I got there, we were in what was called the Red Brick Store, which, down on Main Street. I mean, we call it the RBS. The church was so full of people, we were practically hanging out the windows. We were sitting on the stairs, because it was a 2-level building, to try to listen to him when he was teaching.
Okay.
And so
do you remember that first time you attended a fundamentalist meeting?
the first time?
Yep.
Yeah.
I was so nervous when I attended my first one. I'm not gonna lie. I went strapped. I'm not gonna lie. I'm like, okay, if I gotta shoot my way out, so be it. But here we go. It was nothing crazy or anything like that. But by that time, Warren Jeffs had done significant damage, and you just weren't quite sure what you were getting.
Well, I was pretty skeptical when I first went, but because of the doctrines that were being taught, I'm like, I'm going to give him my full attention and see what he has to say. Hear him out.
That's awesome.
And so, here I am, been a member of the LDS Church ever since I was born, or at least ever since I was baptized, anyways. Family was old Mormon pioneer stock. Third great grandpa had, 10 wives and 50 kids, and so we were pretty well familiar with, what fundamentalist type of thinking was.
Okay.
But I did not know I did not know anything about the Adam God doctrine until I heard it from James. It wasn't until after that I asked my mom about it, and she's like, "Oh yeah, well, they used to teach that." And I'm like, "Well, why didn't you tell me about it?" And,
right.
well, they just said it wasn't important, so I didn't say anything.
Yeah,
it's kind of how things get lost, in the LDS Church.
it is. It is.
They just figure it's not important. What need hath my Lord of this tower, seeing that this is a time of peace type of thoughts.
Right, exactly. All right, so let's jump back on to Jim Harmston's story here. So he's getting in trouble with the stake president for maybe asking certain questions and teaching certain things. What happens from there?
Well, he started having home meetings, and people just started to come. They hadn't organized a church yet, and yeah, he moved to Manti. He had been living in Ogden before, but he was a realtor,
Mhm.
and God just told him to come down here and to, he wanted to find a place where God wanted him to be. And so, he was down here, uh, participated in church. He was a scout leader. A lot of the boys that were here, he was their scout leader, and he helped them get their Eagle Scout and stuff like that. And anyways, forward to that, these people started to meet with him, and he had fleshed out what is called the models, and that is his teachings that he gave, which there's like 7 of them that he would give that last about 2 to 3 hours per each one, that would basically go over the plan of salvation and the plan of exaltation. And so these people, they would come and meet, and rumor has it that the people were being monitored by the church, and then they'd get home, and suddenly their bishop would be on their tail asking them, why are you meeting with this person down there in Manti? Why, what's up with that? And but at the time, he was still LDS. But
so Chris, were these just study groups that he was having in his home? Is that kind of what these
pretty
were?
much.
Okay. So it's
Yeah,
it's not like they were doing ordinances yet or anything like that.
Oh no,
It was
no,
just
they were
a study group.
just a study group.
Okay.
He had, and eventually he, when it came to start asking, who was it? I can't remember who it was, Buckner, about praying in the short order of prayer. And he asked the temple president, well, don't you think that that we should know, or, and should we do and stuff like this? And he just said, well, if I was supposed to know, then somebody would tell me. And, so eventually he said, you know what? I'm going to start praying in the shorter prayer. And so he said to his wife, Elaine, if God's going to toast us for this, it's better to try and die than not, And so they put on their priesthood robes, and it changed ever since. And that is, they basically told him, well, you can't, they had told him you can't teach in your home, and,
Ooh.
but when they found out he was, as far as the shorter prayer thing, that was the deal breaker. They excommunicated him, and and I can't particularly remember exactly when they excommunicated him. All I know is that the church eventually was established in 1990.
That's so crazy, because we have accounts of people performing the true order of prayer in their homes for a lot of years.
Right.
It's really not till about the 50s when the church starts really getting animate. Don't do this at home.
Well, there's a letter that was sent out to all the stake presidents in 1978, which was a month before they gave the blacks the priesthood, told them they were no longer to have prayer circles, that it was taking away from their family time. And instead, in lieu of you having these prayer circles, you can just have, you can request members of your stake presidency or something like that. They can go and pray and have their prayer circles or whatever in the temples, but no longer can you have it in your stake area. So basically, they cut the phone line to these people back in '78, a month before they were going to have that vote on the blacks and the priesthood, which is typical tactic. When, if you're going to rob somebody's house, you cut the phone line first so they can't call out, and then go ahead and do what you're going to do. And that's what happened.
Wow. So yeah, when I read that, it was shocking to me that they went that direction to take that away. So, okay, so let's go to that time where Jim's been excommunicated. Does he immediately start a new church after that, or is he just kind of left hanging for a while?
I don't think he started. I can't exactly remember the timeline of how long it took him from the time. I know there was a period of time. It wasn't an immediate, let's start the church up as soon as that happened. They just continued their meetings, and eventually the church was formed.
And a couple more quick questions here before we move on. It sounds like he was really kind of getting a little bit of a, I don't want to, well, maybe that is the right word. He had a certain amount of people who enjoyed coming over to his home for those meetings.
Oh, yeah.
What happens to a lot of those folks? Once he's X, do they stop coming or do they continue to come?
Well, a number of them do continue to come. But there was a time where that group of people met together, but some people were doing things that were immoral. That's basically when James said, this is wrong and it's an abomination. You can't do this. And it had to do with people in plural marriage, 3 in a bed type of thing.
Gotcha.
He said, we're not going to do that. And so it separated the church. The church separated, and a bunch of people went their way, and the rest of us were left here.
Okay.
And so that's when, that's essentially pretty quickly right after that, then the church was formed.
Okay. All right. So I'm just trying to wrap my head around things here. So was plural marriage already being practiced within this study group?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Was Jim a practicing polygamist at that point, sir?
I don't know. I don't know if he was at that point. I don't know that exact timeline.
No, you're good. You're good. No sweat. No sweat. I want to talk a little bit more about the models. It's a unique sounding kind of thing. And you said they're teachings. Why did he call them the models?
Well, it was kind of like a model would build one concept upon another. And so he would draw pictures as he was doing a model, and it would build from one concept to another. And so there was a lot of visual imagery that people were able to jump from one concept to the next to the next. So it was literally like a model that he was building, and it was something that he and some others had come up with, previously, and it's something they'd worked on.
Okay, cool. No, that makes sense. And I do want to revisit those here in a minute, because I'm guessing there's probably some doctrine there that's unique to the TLC. Is that correct?
I think, yeah. It's like it's unique to the TLC and maybe another group, but then some other things are unique to the TLC and this group.
Okay. We'll get there here after a little while. I want to continue with the story. So at the time that Jim forms the TLC, and is that an okay acronym to use?
Sure.
Okay. At the time he starts the TLC, how many members start the group with him, or is it just him and his family?
Oh boy, no, it wasn't just him and his family. There must have been 250. There was, I don't know. There were just people just coming and going all the time. I would say it's probably typically a running total of at least a couple hundred people.
Okay. All right. And the typical Sunday meetings were held out of the red brick store there, right?
They were,
Okay.
until the assembly hall was built, anyways.
Okay, and the assembly hall was there in Manti as well?
Yes, right on that same block.
Okay, and at this time, do they immediately begin like building a temple, getting ready for ordinances that way? I mean, in his vision, because fundamentalism, when you talk about fundamentalist groups, there's some who have a very hands-off kind of feeling when it comes to temple work, right? Like, no, that's something we're supposed to do in the millennium. Other groups don't have that compunction. They'll go forward and they'll be like, let's build a temple.
It was pretty quick.
It was pretty quick. Okay, cool.
The endowment house, yeah.
So, and if this is too personal, you can tell me to shut the pie hole. Won't offend me a bit. It's my understanding that you need your second anointings in order to dedicate a temple or start temple work, right? And kind of be in that position. When does Jim receive his second anointings?
Well, that was with his, that was basically when he had his meeting with the four angels. And that, what year was that? It was November the 25th. Let's see if I've got that on the notes. I can't remember exactly what year it was.
If you don't, it's okay, Chris.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not the best with dates, but
No, you're
it was a number of years before.
So did he have those visitations before or after he left the LDS Church?
November 25th. Oh, November the 25th, 1990. So, yeah. November the 25th, 1990 is when he had the visit with four angels.
Okay, and he's excommunicated
it was
1990 as well?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
And then it was 94 is when the church was organized. So, yeah.
Okay. So if you don't mind, because I'm always fascinated by people receiving those kind of visions, if it's not too sacred and it's something that you can share, what was said in the meeting with these four angels? Is it like four distinct meetings, or do they all come at once?
It was at once.
Okay. Do we know the names?
Yeah, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, and Moses.
Okay. And what was the thrust of the meeting? I mean, what happened there?
Well, he just said that they laid their hands on his head and gave him the anointing, which was his second anointing. It's calling an election at that time. So, and as far as what they said,
the baby who was breathing.
That was a previous stream. Sorry, I'm communicating with my
No,
wife.
you're good. You're good.
She's trying to remind me of things, but he didn't really say exactly what they said, other than the fact that they laid their hands on his head and called him to his apostolic calling.
Okay. And so from there, that's where he probably gets to feeling like, okay, now I'm empowered, so to speak. This has heavenly approval. Now we can go to work.
Right.
Okay, cool. Okay, let's follow that through then. So he's received that authority. He then sets up the church. And roughly how many members were there when he first started? Do you have a count, or?
I don't have an exact count. It was roughly 250, 300, something like that.
That's not a bad group to start with. I mean,
all I remember is going there for the first time, and the thing was just packed.
Holy cow. So you get the assembly hall, and is the temple in the assembly hall as well? Or
we call that, that's our endowment house.
Okay.
Right.
Very cool. Now, were vicarious work for the dead performed there as well?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. No,
all the ordinances.
That makes a lot of sense. So is there a missionary program where missionaries sent out at that point or anything?
Yeah, they were. The apostles went out throughout the nation and to England and other places to preach the gospel.
Holy cow. And what
And
were these, like 2-year missions or 5-year missions, or what were they?
uh, they weren't that long. They were just a matter of, I believe, a month, a few
Okay.
weeks, or something like that. They went out there specifically to anoint particular areas, you know, that would be places for people to gather. Eventually, the place of the gathering was always going to be here in Manti.
Okay. All right. I've been done plenty of work up there. It's a really cool area. I could see why
Yeah.
someone would choose that area for sure.
Mhm.
Or have the direction place there. So do you guys experience a lot of growth right away?
Back then,
Yeah.
oh yeah, yeah, at that point. But there was also people with their different perceptions that began to also fall away as well. You know, people came expecting to see Jesus, and they fell away because their paradigms weren't met.
Okay.
And what do you
Gotcha.
say?
Yeah, no, it happens all the time in the
Sure.
mainstream church as well as fundamentalist sects. There's
Yeah.
always kind of
People come with their own ideas and their own agendas, and they think that that things are going to happen the way they think, and sometimes they just don't. I mean, you look at the Millerites, the great disappointment. They
Mhm.
believed that Jesus was going to come in 1844. Sort of ironic that Joseph Smith happened to be in the neighborhood at the time. Uh, so people made fun of him for, I hear preachers even to this day making fun of him for, oh, they sold all their stuff, and believed that Jesus was coming and stuff like that. And there's never a wrong time to dedicate yourself to the Lord and to consecrate yourself and to rid yourself of the things of this world. There's
Absolutely.
never a wrong time to do that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Okay. So as time goes along, does it start to kind of have that pattern of like elders quorum and high priest group and all that other stuff? Does it look kind of like the LDS church, only maybe 100 years previous, so to speak, at that point?
Yeah, kind of like we had our elders quorum meetings and women's society, and I went to the quorum of the 12 meetings, and so yeah, yeah, in some respects, but then in other respects there were things that were radically different, because there were two divisions of the church: the temporal church and the eternal church. The temporal church is the true and living church. It's like the LDS church. That's a temporal church. The only purpose of a temporal church is to prepare people to enter into the eternal church, which is governed by the church of the firstborn.
Right.
So, anyways, that was radically different than obviously the LDS church. And then of course, when we had our meetings, we met in the robes in the short order prayer, and on a given occasion we would have a solemn assembly and things like that, where we would present to the Lord the work that we had done,
Right.
type of thing.
Right. I get you. So as time goes along, what kind of things do you see that really kind of, because in all of our faith journeys, I think there are times that things are really good. You're on some of those spiritual highs, right? And then
Uh-huh.
the mundane sets in, right? I don't
Uh-huh.
care who you are. I think we all go through that time where it's like, crap, it's time to go to church, right? So you get up, not because you're necessarily enthused to do it, but because you feel like you're committed now, right? What was it that kept you committed all these years to the church? I mean, he must have had some sort of teachings or something that really resonated with you.
Yeah. I don't we I did There wasn't a time that I ever had where I didn't feel motivated and wanting to go to learn more, because we were always, told to go and get revelation about some of the things that would be presented next week in the church. And so uh, we were always fed. There was never a time that we, at least in my own experience, that I did not feel the driving motivation of the Spirit, to do the things that we were asked to do.
Very cool. What were some of the early challenges you feel like or maybe even challenges all the way through that maybe the TLC faced with being a fundamentalist church out in the open?
Well, I mean, obviously we met up with prejudice from the LDS people that lived in the area, but that wasn't, that didn't bother me too much. Mostly it was sometimes the things that went on between people within the church where, somebody wasn't considered or something like that. And
Gotcha. Gotcha. How was he able to manage that much growth that quickly? Right? It's one of those things where growth can be both a blessing and a curse, right? Because
Right.
the blessing when there's more people there willing to do the work, but now you have more personalities to contend with. How was he able to manage a lot of that?
I don't know, because I couldn't have, to be quite honest. He kept us engaged. I mean, we always had a mission and a fixed goal each week, and to accomplish, as far as, hey, let's go study this. Let's look in Gileadi's work of Isaiah, and let's look into this, and let's go get some revelation, and let's talk about it next week. And uh, to listen to him preach was like nothing else. I cannot describe what it was like to listen to him open the scriptures and begin to expound things like Isaiah, and our Book of Mormon studies and things like that.
Really? So what was it, just the insights that he carried with
Because
that kind
he
of what
said, when he was reading the Book of Mormon, it was like as if he had already lived it. He could see it clearly in his mind.
Okay.
And Isaiah was his particular favorite thing to go through. It was a little bit of a challenge for the members, to wrap our heads around. It was a lot easier for him, but we caught on.
Gotcha. And so along with that, what was his leadership style like, right? Because it can vary wildly from group to group, right? Sometimes there's, especially when there's one guy in charge, right? Sometimes that guy is Warren Jeffs, right? That is just a horror show. Other times they are guys who just love their people and are trying the darndest they can for their people. So what was his leadership style like in terms of his thrust? Was it highly controlled, do you feel, or do you feel like it was more like, we're going to do the best we can in teaching good principles, and then hopefully everything works out from there?
He would teach us the principles and let us govern ourselves. Okay. And it's not like you couldn't see things that were going on that people were doing that weren't quite right, but a lot of times he would give them quite a lot of latitude, that would give them time to figure out, what they should be doing and what they should not be doing. And I think he was very merciful, and things that
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by DeseretFlag.com. I've said this before and I really mean it. Mormonism isn't just a religion, it's a culture. As such, it has its own vernacular and practices, but also its own symbols. And those symbols become even more important and prominent when you look back into our history. Perhaps one of the most recognizable symbols of Mormonism is the Deseret Flag. This is the flag that I use as cover art in this podcast. This was also used for a good chunk of time during the pioneer era in Utah. Now, today we have people who want to replace the existing Utah flag with some other progressive monstrosity. Well, I think it's damn past time that we start pushing back here a little bit in Utah. Our friends at Defending Utah are here to help you with that. Now, if you go to DeseretFlag.com, you can now purchase your own Deseret State flag. It's time here that we start making ourselves known and join the resistance against those who seek to rewrite our state's history. Go to DeseretFlag.com or check out the link in this episode's page show notes and get yours today. Can't get enough of the Mormon Renegade podcast? Well, good news. We're on Patreon, and there's 3 packages that you can choose from. The first one, the Slightly Rowdy package, allows you to hear the podcast without all those pesky commercials getting in the way. For those who want a slightly more in-depth experience, there's the Stirring It Up package, where you can hear ad-free audio, ad-free video, and transcripts. Finally, for those who want to go full Renegade, that package is available too, where you can get everything in the previous 2 packages, plus an extra show where myself and Ben Winfield break down the news of the day from a very Mormon point of view. You will also get exclusive access to Renegade Chat, and on there you'll be able to talk to others about the show or whatever topics are on your mind. Go to Patreon today and get your exclusive content.
A lesser person probably would have come down pretty hard on. He gave him a little bit more time, but when it did come time to bring down the hammer, it did come down.
Okay. All right. With one, and again, if this is something that you don't feel like you want to share, I totally get it. But at least for me, some of the hallmarks of leader-centered control that always concerned me was how was marriages regulated, I guess, right? Was there any of the stuff you ever saw where like families were rearranged or, families broken apart or anything like that by leadership and be reassigned?
Not by the leadership, by their own revelation. I've seen them do that before we came. A little bit more, but by the time we got here in 97, things seem to have normalized. And so
done by revelation.
yeah, it was basically by revelation from the people themselves. James never told anybody, that okay, you got to marry this person or you got to marry that person. He didn't get involved with that. Everybody would just simply be responsible to receive the revelation on their own, and then of course they would present it to him and say, hey, this is the revelation I got, and he'd go and pray about it. Okay, sounds good, do it. And
okay.
Sometimes people would do things that I think weren't necessarily the best things or the wisest things, but he would let them go ahead and do it, to let them gain a little bit of experience, I guess. So.
Gotcha. So he always respected their agents.
He did.
Okay. Perfect. Yeah, that to me is always kind of a red flag when that sort of family planning starts cropping up. I always get a little bit nervous.
Yeah, I was, before I came into the gathering, I was afraid of that sort of thing potentially happening because I had heard about it happening in other groups. But I'm telling you that didn't happen here.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's awesome. When you would send missionaries out and they would start that effort of gathering people in, were they regimented? Like I remember in 95 when I joined the LDS church, it was like pamphlets, right? It was very regimented. Is that how that went? Or did you guys find that there were people who just came to you with questions and then your answers resonated with them and then they would bring them in?
Well, when the apostles would go out, they would just preach to whoever that they come in contact with, and they didn't really. I don't. They had pamphlets at the time. Whether or not they really used it, those apostles knew their scriptures really well, and so I don't think they had to rely on a prop.
Gotcha.
They were just simply able to go and testify and let the chips fall where they may. Now, as far as later on, when the apostles were brought back, then we used the website to reach people, the TLC website, kind of like what we have here, which is now tlcfaith.org, and a lot of the things that were on that iteration of the website are on this one as well. So we use that as a missionary tool to bring people in, and a lot of it was by word of mouth. People would say, "Hey, I know this person." People all the way up in Canada, "Hey, I knew that guy who came down here and joined the TLC. Tell me a little bit more about what they believe." So
Gotcha.
it was a lot of word of mouth.
Gotcha. And so now let's move kind of farther down the storyline here a little bit. So let's see, formed in 94, so that was 30 years ago, will be 30 years ago this year. How long before Jim eventually passes away? And is there anything in that time frame from 94 until he passes away that's notable within the history of the church that you want to go over?
Just busy doing temple.
Yeah, we were doing a lot of temple work because we were preparing for the coming of the Lord, and so that was the big push, is to do temple work and to get as many of our relatives sealed to us as we could. So, as you know, he passed away in 2013. So,
Right.
94 to 2013 is when he was part of the church, and so
good deal. So nothing other than, and I won't say anything else of note because temple work's pretty important, but no shakeups, anything like that of note that would.
Oh, there was people that left, here and there. Yeah, sure. And had their gripes that their expectations weren't met. Yeah, there were times the church was shook. Lots of times.
Okay. All right. What does Jim pass away from? Is it just old age or
heart attack?
Heart attack. Okay. So at the time of his passing, what happens to leadership at that point? Who does the Quorum of the 12 step up and begin administering the affairs of the church from a quorum setting?
We didn't really change anything at that point. The Quorum of the 12 continued to function as they were before.
Mm-hmm.
Our function as the Quorum of the 12 was exterior to the church, as mission, as
right, just like
apostles.
The covenant say, yeah,
as apostles of the Lord Jesus Christ, and of course, we still had a bishop who governed the temporal church, but the king and priest, which was James, of the eternal church, which is the church of the firstborn, did not have a successor.
So did that part of the church continue to function then?
Yeah, it continued to function with the Quorum of the 12, and but as far as there being a presiding king and priest over the eternal church, it still remained as James. That it wasn't passed down to anyone.
Okay. All right. So the Quorum of the 12 just stepped in to kind of, I won't say fill that role, but kind of make sure that work continues on in the eternal church, as you put it.
Yeah, mostly in the form of the work for the dead.
Okay.
At that point.
Okay.
We weren't, by that time, we weren't doing external missionary work.
Okay.
We had come back in because the Lord revealed to us that the day of the Gentile, or the gathering in of the Gentile, had finished.
Okay. So can people still join the church then, or is that?
Yeah, they still can.
Okay.
So, but as far as those who would be sealed by the law of adoption to James, obviously that's not an option anymore.
Right.
Because he's not here.
Right.
But you can be sealed by the law of adoption to a king and a priest, which would be a member of the Quorum of the 12 or anybody else in the Church of the Firstborn.
Gotcha. Okay. So after Jim passes away in 2013, and again, I want to be gentle here. There's a schism that happens, right? Somewhere in between 2013 and today. Does that essentially lob the TLC in half? What happens there?
No, it was a basically, and I guess I want to be gentle too, because I still want to give, some room for those in what we call the main body of the church. See, the division was basically 5 versus 50. So it was 1/10 of the church, that was opposed by the larger group for a few reasons that centered around the true order of prayer, or lack of it, lack of other things, and the temple garment. The one thing that will distinguish the smaller group from the larger group is the larger group no longer wears a priesthood garment. So that created a pretty immediate division within the church, is when they didn't approve of those of us who decided to wear our garments, our priesthood garments. And so, and all of us, like when Joseph had, before he went to the martyrdom, to be fair, he had removed his garments, as well as Hiram and John Taylor. I think Willard Richards didn't have to. Joseph said, if we have these on, they can't kill us. And so we all had we had received the revelation to temporarily remove our garments. Now, in some people's minds, it was permanent, but in our minds, it was not. And so when God revealed to us to put ours back on, well, that pretty much became a straw that broke the camel's back.
Gotcha. And so I'm just trying to understand here, Chris, was that the majority of the group that decided to leave their garments off, or was that the minority?
The majority do not wear garments.
Okay. All right. And you said there was a revelation to take them off for a time. Was that a family revelation, or did that come down from leadership?
Well, it was a revelation submitted by a member of the Eternal Church, and then it was submitted to James, of course, for his approval, and then he submitted it to the church, and he said, "Go home, pray on it, and come back and let me know," because they had this family had received revelation that God said it's time for us to remove our garments, and so we all went home and prayed about it, and we got the revelation. Okay, it's time to take our garments off. And as it happened, James died within about a month after that. And so I'm pretty convinced that the removal of the garment leads to death.
Sure.
You can't escape that fact, I mean, you're told in the endowment, you wear this throughout your life, until you finish your work here on earth. And there was a doctrinal reason to do it, to remove it, but there's also a doctrinal reason to put it back on.
Yeah. I have I wear the long garment,
And we do too.
and yeah, I can't imagine not having it now. Kind of
Right.
accustomed to it. If it's not too bold, what was the reasoning behind the idea to take them off? I understand it was kind of a revelation, but where did that come from? I think that Joseph obviously had his reasons for taking his off, but
Yeah.
what happened there in the TLC with that?
It was because we were preparing for a transition to the terrestrial order.
Okay. All right, I got you. Okay, so that split occurs, and it sounds like you put your garments back on. Is that correct? Or okay?
Yeah, July the 4th, 2016. I put mine back on, and my wife, and then in August did I say July the 4th? July the 4th, put them on. August the 16th, which was also coincidentally the 9th of Av, which is when the Jews were kicked out of the temple. We were kicked out. There were 5 of us that said, well, this is what God revealed to us. This is what he said. Our church has always been governed, the eternal church is governed, as our prophet told us, by revelation. And it was by revelation that we received the revelation to do that, to put these garments on.
Okay. And is it just the 5 of you now?
Well, one has died and a couple of them went back to their families. So really, it's now down to just myself and my wife and one other who's here.
Gotcha.
And my son, but he's not, it's not doubt.
Right.
Too young.
So are you guys still in fellowship with the TLC then, or?
We try to be, but we're not allowed to go into their building.
Gotcha. So now you just worship at home, sort of a thing, then, huh?
Right.
Gotcha.
Right.
10-4. I'm with you. I'm following you now. I apologize if this is bringing up any bad stuff. I didn't mean it to do that.
That's okay. It's not like, when Jesus said, before he was crucified, he told the disciples, hey, they're going to mistreat you, and they're going to, they're going to do things to you. So don't be surprised when they do it. They're going to think they're doing God a service. So I'm not surprised.
Sure. I got you. So right now, and I'm trying to sort this all out, and I apologize. So did you retain the name of the church, TLC, or did that go with the group now that?
Well, we just kept the name as we've always been, the TLC, the True and Living Church of Jesus Christ of Saints of the Last Days. One of the apostles, I guess, had contacted me, had a little dispute with me, and said that our church name was changed, because the church incorporated a number of years ago, and so they changed it to the True and Living Church and lopped off of Jesus Christ, the True and Living Church of Jesus Christ, and they lopped off of Saints of the Last Days. And it was just simply, that was part of the incorporation of the church. Of course, James had told us before that this church would never be incorporated. This is an example of one of those decisions that the people wanted, but he said, okay, go ahead and do it. Let's see what happens.
Yeah. So he did very much what Joseph and Brigham did in a lot of ways. Like, if you want this, you can have it, but it won't get where you want to go.
Right. And that sort of thing happened quite a bit, because we had, received the revelation that we would leave our employment and start, working in the kingdom and stuff like that. And so all of us left our employment, including us. And then people received revelation that they should go back to work. And so James said, okay, go ahead and go back to work. If that's what the revelation was, go ahead and do it. But let's see how you do. Will you continue in praying in the order of prayer? Will you continue in receiving revelation? Will you continue doing the other things that you were taught to do, even though you're in the world doing those sorts of things? I'm not going to condemn you for it, but let's just see if you can maintain your spirituality while you're doing that at the same time.
Kind of one of those things where you can't have one foot in Zion and another in Babylon.
Yeah.
At some point, or serve two masters, if you will.
Yeah. So he wouldn't condemn anybody for doing it. He just said, let's just see how you do.
Gotcha. So now we have these two groups. There's the True and Living Church, the one you're a part of. I'm blanking on the name. Help me, Chris.
The True and Living Church of Jesus Christ of Saints of the Last Days.
Okay,
which
and
is
then,
the name. When we would do work for the dead, the ordinances for the dead, they were made members of the True and Living Church of Jesus Christ of Saints of the Last Days. Which is why I'm like, I'm not going to change it, because all of my family relatives are sealed in that church by that church's, in the name of that church. I'm not going to change it to the Incorporated Church's name. I'm not going to do that.
And then we'll just say the Incorporated Church, passing no judgments. It's just a way for me to keep it
right.
So with the Incorporated Church, are they still performing temple work over there?
No.
Okay.
And the only reason why I know that is because we had wires over the inside of the building, and you could see from outside that they had taken all those down. All the veils that were in the assembly hall, they're gone.
Okay.
So you can
Public meetings.
And they began to have public meetings and things like that. And
oh wow,
that was kind of the little bit of the rift too, because we had an objection, because in our temple, we didn't allow people to come into our church meetings that were not baptized members, and they wanted to bring investigators into our assembly hall, which was our temple, and we said no. And so that created quite a rift, because it's understandable people want to bring more people into the church, but you got to do it the right way. We had a red brick store still to have meetings with them there, so there was a provision for it.
Right. It's not like you were turning people away. It was just
we weren't turning people away.
Space.
We just said,
yeah, this is just
we said this is our holy place. You can bring them over there, but you can't bring them here.
Right. Yeah. So you weren't turning anyone away. You were just saying this is sacred space that's reserved for.
Exactly. And I told them, I says, the LDS Church, they have the same standards too. You can't just walk in and say, hey, I want to hear the 6 discussions in the celestial room.
Right.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So is plural marriage was obviously practiced within the TLC back when it was one unit.
Right.
Is it still practiced in the Incorporated Church?
It is.
Okay. All right. Perfect. And I assume you have no issues with plural marriage yourself.
No.
Okay.
No.
All right.
No, we have no problem. We fully embrace it, even though we're not currently living it.
Sure. And then as far as like unique tenets of the faith, both, probably more or less when you were together as one unit, what were some of the things that were unique to the TLC that maybe a run-of-the-mill Latter-day Saint, other than like Adam, God, and Curse of Cain, were there any other distinct doctrines that you can think of that would strike someone as different or unfamiliar with?
Yeah, multiple mortal probations.
Okay.
Or in other words, reincarnation.
Okay.
Yeah, that was one of those ones that the LDS people would object to, that we firmly believe in, that we've lived many lives, and one of the reasons why Jesus says, "Whom do you say that I am?" Was because he believed, the Jews back then, they understood it, Otherwise, why would Herod say he's John the Baptist, whom I have beheaded? They all knew that he was the son of Mary. They all knew, in fact, all the Jews at the time, they said, well, isn't Joseph his father? And here Herod is saying, isn't this the one that I beheaded? He's back from the dead.
Okay.
They understood multiple mortal probations. This isn't anything new. So,
do you mind getting into that doctrine just a little bit while I got you? Because I've never talked about it on the podcast before.
okay. Hey, sure.
Okay. So, because here's one of the things I wonder about on this. If that is true, if multiple mortal probations, reincarnation is true, then how do we explain sealing covenants being sealed to somebody forever? Now, are you saying that you always come back and find that same person again? Or
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yeah,
So
you kind of tend to move along in your family lines, kind of like school of fish.
okay. All right. So it's not like there will be a bunch of sorting out that has to be done with that in the end. You're always essentially sealed to the same person.
Well, to the same person or person. Well, when you're talking about plural marriage, I mean, you're talking to persons.
Right, persons, but I guess what I'm asking is that when you come back, you always find your spouse again, right? Or spouses if you're a man.
You'll find them. Whether or not you'll marry them at the time, you may or may not, or they might be your relative or your sister or something like that, or it just depends.
Okay. All right.
One way or another, you're going to be in the vicinity of that person.
Okay.
You'll go through, that generation together. That's why the prophets talk about this is a wicked generation. He's talking about a group of people that move along the timeline together as a family.
Okay. All right. So it's not always guaranteed that you'll be husband and wife in whatever life you're in.
Maybe not.
Okay. All right. And then is this just part of how you see eternal progression working is part of these multiple probations where
it is.
You essentially come back until you get it right? Is that kind of the idea?
It is. It's exactly what it is. Heber Kimball spent a lot of time talking about the parable of the potter, where a vessel would be made over so many iterations into a vessel of honor. At one point it would become kind of snappish, I think is the way the scriptures describe it. And so the potter takes it and throws it into the mill to be ground up and to come back and to be a little bit more passive in the hands of the potter. So yeah, as far as the number of iterations a person has to go through, it depends on how long it takes a person to overcome the things of this world. The more you gain attachments to the things of this world, the more you're going to be reprobated. These earthly attachments is what holds you here.
Right.
Eventually, when you can cut all those ties and triumph over all things like the Lord Jesus Christ did by the time that he said, fear not, I have overcome the world, then you can move on and gain your kingdom, as an atom on another world.
Okay. So let me ask you this about this doctrine. Do you ever catch glimpses of who you were before in a different probation?
Sure. Yeah. When I was a kid, I knew that I had fought in World War II. I don't know how many dreams of fighting in World War II. Every time it ended with me dying, but it was very vivid. I remember fighting against the Germans and lying in a conduit, and eventually all I saw was a flash of light, and that was it.
Okay. All right. And then now I'm going to ask another question. And again, if it's too sacred or whatever, I totally understand. But did Jim ever talk about maybe some of his previous probations? Did he ever make
Sure.
reference of, Joseph Smith or something like that?
Yeah, he had talked about it.
That he in one of his previous probations he was Joseph Smith?
He had talked about things like that. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Now, the reason why we don't preach it to people is because of what I would call the sin of familiarity, which is, well, isn't that the son of Joseph? We know him. How could he say that he has come from heaven? Type of idea.
Gotcha.
When you're that close to somebody, it's hard to believe, that somebody of that stature would come back into probation and be somebody so close that you could just, reach out and touch them.
Gotcha.
So,
Gotcha. 10-4. No, that makes, I see where you're coming from on that. All right. Well, thank you for that, because I haven't ever had anyone on to really talk about that before. And when you said that, it kind of perked my ears up a little bit. I was like, ooh, we got to look at it a little bit.
Well, it's why King David said, that he rejoiced that his soul would not be left in hell forever.
Right.
Because he too would go through multiple probations, and he would have to atone for his own sins.
Gotcha.
And that's why, when a murderer can't be forgiven of his own sins, in other words, somebody's not going to step in and say, I'll pay for that. No, you have to pay for that. You have to atone for your own sin for that. And David had to atone. And that's why we see in the priests, when they go into the temple, the priest atones for his sin as well as the sin of his congregation. Well, David had to atone for his sin as well as the sin of his people.
So then then that begs the question here, what would be the purpose of Christ's atonement if we have to atone for our own sins?
Christ's atonement atones for the sins of those who have not willingly sinned. If you willingly sin and you rebel, then you pay for your own. But for those that have sinned ignorantly, the atonement covers those sorts of things.
Okay. And forgive me, I'm just thinking here. What about the term infinite and eternal atonement? Infinite would essentially be just that, right? Forever.
Yeah, right. It would cover from
Okay.
from that point, from forward to back. I can't say from beginning to end because there is no beginning and there is no end. Like what Joseph said, if you take a ring, you only get a beginning and end unless you cut it.
Right.
But
okay. How about any other teachings that people would find unique to the TLC?
Well, it would companion along with the concept of multiple mortal probations, which would be the condescensions of God. In other words, that not only do his people reprobate, but so does God with them. That he himself has been in many probations, and Brigham Young testified to that. He said, Jesus has been in more probation, what did he say? Jesus has been on earth more times than you have supposed. And then when you get to the, Abinadi, that just clenches it. Abinadi, when he testifies in Mosiah chapter 15, he says, I would that you should understand that God himself would come down among, I can't remember exactly how he said it, and he would atone for the sins of his people. In other words, God, who we already understand as Adam, would atone for the sins of his people. And he would be rejected and he would be crucified, which is why we see Paul referring to Jesus Christ as the second Adam, which is why God said, I am the Alpha and the Omega. I am the beginning and I am the end, the first and the last. I am the first. You might as well say it. I'm the first Adam and I'm the last Adam.
Okay.
This is the condescensions of God.
Okay.
That they talk about in Second Nephi.
Sure.
And First Nephi.
Sure. So and I'm just seeing if I understand correctly here the theology that you're talking about here. So is it kind of the understanding that Adam came back again as Christ?
Yep.
So who is it then that Joseph Smith sees in the first vision?
It's a good question. Well, okay. When the first personage, as it is written, pointed to the second personage and said, "This is my beloved son, hear him." Who's the first person that Joseph Smith talked to? That's recorded in the first vision. Who was it that he talked to? Who came to him and told him, for one, where the plates are, and then came and visited a bunch of times how to make garments?
Would have been Moroni, right? It was Moroni.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
It would have been Mormon and Moroni.
Okay. And that's who he saw in the first vision, the very first vision he had.
Right. Now the LDS Church puts out that he saw Jesus and God the Father. Well, that's why I told you earlier that the endowment is a parallel to the first vision. Because what is Joseph doing? He's seeking for further light and for messengers from Father. And who does he send? The apostles. Okay. Does he come himself? Does Adam's father himself come? No, he doesn't. He sends his messengers. He sends his servants.
Okay. All right. No. All right. Anything else that would be unique that doesn't tie into with multiple mortal probations?
No.
Okay. No sweat. So there's no longer any real missionary effort going on with the TLC. There's still the website and stuff. How many people are in the Incorporated Church today, roughly? Is it still pretty healthy?
No, there's probably about maybe that are members of record, probably 30.
Okay. All right. And does that all kind of happen after Jim passes, that the numbers whittle down?
Yeah, well, it had whittled down over the years, but it whittled down quite a bit when he passed away.
Gotcha.
The church basically kind of went in their own directions.
I gotcha. 10-4. Well, dude, is there anything that you want to cover that we didn't talk about in this?
I can't think of anything now.
We covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, honestly, the biggest push, the biggest point for an apostle is to testify of God and who he is. So I think we've pretty much covered the ground there. Other than that, the other push is the ordinances, because it's the 84th section of the Doctrine and Covenants says without the ordinances, the power of godliness is not manifest to men in the flesh. And here we are, we've got the LDS Church, cutting down the ordinances right and left, until you have nothing left. And we have how many of the fundamentalist churches actively endowing their members, the FLDS people. We got girls that come over here from the FLDS church. They don't, they're like, how old are they? 19, 20 years old. They don't have endowments. They have no prospects for getting married.
Parents don't have endowments.
Parents don't have endowments. They can't, well, what do you know about God? They don't know anything.
Right.
So how much light is left in the world, even among fundamentalists or Mormons?
I think that there is a renewed emphasis on temple work. I know that there are several branches of fundamentalism now that either have temples or are in the midst of building, whether that's in the planning stages or whatnot. But I feel like there's a renewed effort being put towards that. Certainly within kind of I always like to call it kind of the muster lines of fundamentalism, there's a renewed push.
Yeah.
I think
but the problem is when they're on a false premise with their endowment or their ordinances, and if they have ordinances that are not the way Joseph gave them, then it's a mockery to God.
So when you say the way Joseph gave them, do you think that those ordinances kind of were compromised under Brigham Young's leadership?
No.
Okay. All right.
Not at all. No, because Joseph told Brigham to organize and systematize the endowment. He says, we've got it as good as we can get it right now. Brigham, I want you to organize it and systematize it and make it, he basically made it fairly uniform at the time.
So from what, and I did a lot of research on this. I dove deep on the temple stuff because I was like, this above almost everything else is so important to get right.
Yeah.
As I've had the privilege of looking over a few documents from a few different places, or asked, what iteration are you planning on using? And hearing that come back, I feel like most of these groups have what has to be there in the correct order. So I've been very encouraged as I've seen this. And so I think the fact we live in the age of the internet is a tremendous blessing. I do. I think there's some pitfalls that come with it, but there's no more secrets. You can find exactly what was taken out, and it can be reintroduced with proper authority. So I feel really good about that. And just about, and I'm not going to name names, but there's only one or two that I can think of off the top of my head as I've talked to folks and ran into them that I would be suspect on. The rest of them, I feel like, they got it down. And that's all thanks to the internet, and there are no more secrets, and you can find it everywhere.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, awesome. Well, man, this was great. I appreciate you coming on.
Sure.
And
glad to be here.
I tell everybody who's been on, once you've been on once, you got a standing invitation to come back on again. So if there's any time, you wanted to update on something or anything like that, give me a buzz. I'm always here.
Sure.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thanks again, Chris.
You bet. Thanks.
Bye, everybody.